Welcome to School Talk. I'm Nadja Varney, your host. Today, more and more businesses and industries require a college-level education. More and more expectations and responsibilities are falling to higher education. Well, today we will be talking about your public colleges and universities, the issues that they face that also affect you, your family, and your taxes. We'll talk about their pressures, their professors, and their promises. I'm honored to welcome to the set Barry Maloney. He's the 11th president of Worcester State University. Prior to that, President Maloney served for nearly 20 years at Westfield State University. He's also the chair, or past chair, of the 9 Massachusetts State Universities coordinating body. It's called the Council of Presidents, and indeed he has served on many other boards, but I am so happy to welcome him here to School Talk today. Welcome, President Maloney.
Thank you, Nadja. Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have you. Here we are at Bridgewater, and we're glad to have you from another part of the state today. Before we start talking about the issues, though, I wonder, how did you get drawn into higher education?
You know, my mom and dad, both of my parents were public educators. My mother was an elementary school teacher in Springfield, Mass. For over 30 years. My dad worked as a school administrator, also in the Springfield Public Schools for over 30 years. And so growing up in that environment, education was always a top priority in our family. And after college, I came back to Massachusetts and sought out an opportunity in public higher education. I fell in love with working with college students at a very early age in graduate school, and have continued that since 1991. And as you said, my time at both Westfield and Worcester has been very enlightening. It's really been a part of a passion that I've had for quite some time.
Well, the little bit that I read about Worcester State University, you're doing a great job. I mean, looking at just the activities and so forth there, I can see you're enjoying it because there's a lot happening there. As I said in my opening, we'll start with the pressures that are now on higher ed, and one of the big ones is affordability.
Sure.
You know, the cost that's rising. And I read an article in the Chronicle of Higher Ed. Christopher Newfield is the author of The Great Mistake, How We Wrecked Public Universities and How We Can Fix Them. But he blames this, and I'm going to quote, the cumulative effect of private interests prioritized over the public good. And later on, he says here that the reduced state support was supposed to help them, but instead it left them less effective with the reductions in the American. And I liked his statement, Americans have saved money on taxes, but only to spend it on rising tuition bills. So I wonder if you could speak why to this whole rising cost of tuition.
Well, the cost of education in Massachusetts is a bit skewed. Of course, we have 29 wonderful public higher education institutions. Worcester State being one of the 29. Bridgewater State, where we're at today, is another one of the fine institutions. And in Massachusetts, the education capital of the United States, higher education is one of the most prevalent, most noticeable industries in this state. The former Commissioner Freeland used to like to say, we don't have corn like Iowa, we don't have oil like Texas, we have brain power here in Massachusetts. So in Massachusetts, we've placed a priority on higher education. In Massachusetts, though, at the same time, private higher education has certainly dominated the landscape in terms of the quality conversation. The cost of educating a student at Harvard is the same cost as it takes to educate a student at Worcester State University. We just have been helped over the years by a state subsidy. But when the state subsidies back away, we're left with very little option except to pass along those costs to the students and their families.
Are the colleges and universities working to try to, decrease some of this
We are
cost?
Absolutely. Each of the campuses, Worcester State is no different, is very focused on raising private dollars to offset costs through scholarship. And I'm also very proud to say that Worcester State University was one of the 4 institutions in central Massachusetts that carved out what we called at the time the $30,000 bachelor's degree. The $30,000 bachelor's degree was a pledge by those 4 institutions, Worcester State, Fitchburg State, Mount Wachusett, and Quinsigamond Community College, to freeze the cost of a bachelor's degree and allowing a student to pass through a 2-year school to the 4-year school at a fixed cost of $30,000. Governor Baker liked the idea so much that his administration reworked the agreement so that now we have the Commonwealth commitment. The Commonwealth commitment now spans the entire state. It is essentially a 2+2 program where students pass through the community colleges going to school full-time and make their way to the 4-year schools, again, going full-time, for a guaranteed price point of $27,000. We do anticipate after students apply for federal and state financial aid that the average student will spend somewhere around $15,000 to get both an associate's degree and a bachelor's degree. So you can see this is one way that we here in Massachusetts are trying to curb the rising cost.
Well, it's quite a while ago, as I mentioned earlier, we had a panel with people, with higher ed people from the universities, but also from the community college. Dr. John Sprague, who is just leaving now from the Bristol Community College,
yes,
and he was just such a passionate advocate. And he often said, back then, we have to make it a smooth transition, and now it is happening. That's wonderful in your case as well.
And that goes along with Commissioner Santiago's work to better articulate the transfer pathways so that by the end of this calendar year, just basically at the end of the month, we will have 70% of all of the majors articulated between our public 2-year schools and our 4-year schools. And his commitment is to work on that extra 30% in the coming years so that students and their families will know, starting off at that community college level, if a student chooses to go to the community college, that they will know a very distinct, very well-developed pathway for that student to progress from the 2-year school to the 4-year school. And even from Worcester State to, say, Bridgewater State, so that if a student was to transfer from 4-year school to 4-year schools, they know that they'll be able to transfer in a way that they won't have to make up additional credits.
And all their credits will be accepted.
Correct.
Yes. And I think people from the universities here can transfer to other colleges around the country as well.
Correct.
Which is also very important. We talked a little bit about affordability, but how about access? Progress has been made about, affirmative action and inclusivity. It's been over 60 years now since Brown versus Board of Education, and separate and equal is supposed to be over. But I'm reading in the papers how whatever's happening in education, it's not so integrated as we would like it to be. In fact, I did see this article recently in the campus of University of Missouri at Columbia, where they were trying to figure out what to do. They had a kind of a walkout, and because there were the slurs being made. And the point in the article is that I picked up from it is that it cannot come from the president's office alone. That they were saying here, fraternity people, white fraternity people, were standing there watching one of their colleagues making racial slurs. So it's the culture of the campus, it seems to me, is what they were referring to. So how are state universities doing these days with affirmative action and ways to become inclusive?
Each of the campuses takes these issues very seriously. The activities that took place in Missouri were very, very disturbing. The cases that have happened on other campuses, Yale, for instance, which was, I think, one of the cases that you just referenced relative to the fraternity issues. I mean, those are very disturbing situations. At Worcester State University, what we've done is we have put out 5 action steps to make sure that students know that there is a university-wide commitment towards making sure that the campus is inclusive and making sure that we're diverse and making sure that we're civil in our dialogue. And you're absolutely right. The conversation needs to be led by the presidents, but it needs to be a campus-wide conversation. It has to be accepted and acknowledged and really driven by the campus community, including students. And that's sometimes a group that we need to remind ourselves that we need to be listening to. That was clearly part of the problem in Missouri, and it ended up costing a president and a chancellor their jobs.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about Chapter 9, which I think was to include girls and women students more effectively?
So Title IX had its initial period of notoriety back in the late 60s, early 70s, when it was about making sure that female students were allowed to participate in intercollegiate athletics at the same level. Well, the law itself is of course one rooted in equality and making sure that students are treated fairly regardless of their gender and race. We have, with this current administration, President Obama has come in and reinforced Title IX to the point where he has been focused on sexual assault and how campuses respond, report, and follow up on sexual assault. I'm happy to say the state university system here in Massachusetts banded together to work on this in a way that made sure that not only were we in compliance with the new federal mandates, but actually exceeded them, and make sure that our reporting was done in the same way across the system, and that our students' rights were protected. It's an evolving situation, though, as we know that anytime there are federal mandates and changes to the law, there are always areas that have to be re-examined, and we need to make sure that we are certainly focused on the survivors' rights as well as the students that are accused, and that is still something that all the campuses are focused on.
Well, it's good to know that our state universities are, because we are here in Massachusetts and the Northeast, and again, it's the culture of the people, and I think there's more of an acceptance here, and we hope that throughout the whole country that will take root. Because it doesn't, as I said in the university, it doesn't come only from the president's office. Well, in our country, it doesn't only come from a federal law. It does go down into the culture. There's a great emphasis everywhere, and to me, it's just been a horrible emphasis on accountability in the schools. And most people equate accountability with standardized tests. Well, we could do a whole talk on how that accountability, actually, the president of MTA said that word should be taken out of education because that's a finance word. It's something for books. It's not for kids. But how are we doing with accountability? I'm wondering, how do you evaluate a university?
Well, there are a number of ways. And accountability, you're right, is one of those buzz terms that has been thrown out to education in a way that it assumes that we have not been accountable and we've not been good stewards of our resources, all of our resources. So accountability is measuring student outcomes in terms of their learning outcomes. How many students are graduating? How many students are you retaining from year 1 to year 2, and so on to year 3? But it's also accountability on your budgets. It's accountability on your involvement in the community. It's accountability on your overall resources. These are all things that we have been focused on as a state system. We have focused on at Worcester State University. I'm proud to say that we have developed a new 5-year plan at Worcester State. That 5-year plan will take us out to 2020. It is steeped not only in 5 very important goals for the university, but it also has key action steps that are linked to each of the goals that we are measured on annually. And I think that is certainly something that our students look to see, to make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable to the promise that we make to help them get through in a 4-year time frame. And really, that's one of the best. The graduation rate, in my opinion, is the best measure of accountability. If we are graduating the students that we have brought in, then we're doing our job.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad to hear that, because you're not focusing so much on a particular test or just a one-time measurement. And I'm also happy that you're not talking about measuring the university by the kinds of success they have when they leave. I've heard talk of that, where we would measure the university by what the student does after they graduate. So in a moment, we'll come back and let's talk about those people who teach the students, the professors.
Sure.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.
My life is full of statistics. Thing is, I could have dropped out of school and become one myself, but I didn't, because I had people that believed in me. Here's another statistic. 7,000 students drop out every school day. That's 1 every 26 seconds. It's time that students know that we believe in them.
Inspire a student and share your message of support at boostup.org.
And we're back here talking about our higher education. And now we're going to their professors, the most important part, even though the president is very important, as I say to President Maloney from Worcester State University. But the professors are the real people on the ground for you. And lately I've been a little disturbed with, in elementary especially, but where we have people who are brought in from Teach for America, or they've had 6 weeks training or something and come into the classroom. What level of education and certification do you need to teach at Worcester State College?
One of the things I'm very, very proud of at Worcester State is our commitment, continued commitment to hiring full-time faculty. There is a national dialogue going on right now about the plight of the adjunct faculty member, and I'm happy to say that we continue to hire full-time faculty. Since I arrived, we've hired 93 full-time faculty.
Wow.
And this is a continued commitment, and it goes back to, again, to my roots that I mentioned earlier, where I know that full-time faculty, the quality will show in the classroom, and that of course will be received positively by our students. Have also been committed to, within those hires, to making sure that the individual who we are hiring has the highest credentials possible for that particular field. That is our commitment, and we're over 85% of our faculty on campus have terminal degrees in their area. Some others do not, and those are in the professional programs, and that is where it's most appropriate for folks not to have the PhD per se. But it is a commitment that we make. It's a commitment with a cost, but it's a commitment that has a return on investment when the student can get that high level of instruction in the classroom, but then have the opportunity to meet with that faculty member outside the classroom and develop that student to teacher mentor-mentee relationship, which is critical when it comes to things like writing recommendations for jobs, internships, or even graduate study.
Oh, those professional certifications, sure, but just the actual learning. If you know that that professor will be on campus at such and such a time. I hate to say it, an adjunct for a while at Wheaton College in Norton, where I live. And I was because I lived there, I could be over in the office at any time, and it was just wonderful. The young women there were just so open to discussion and curious. And so the full-time certification and hiring is so important. I'm hurrying along because one of the most misunderstood concepts in higher education, I think, is tenure. And would you just tell our audience what tenure is and why you think it's important?
Well, tenure is a commitment by the institution to provide a lifetime job for that faculty member. It's not a commitment that one gives out very simply. It's not one that does not require a lot of rigor and a lot of work to acquire tenure. For instance, a faculty member at Worcester State University cannot apply for the tenure process until they've hit their 6th year of teaching at the institution. You know, over the first 6 years, we are evaluating annually that particular faculty member's work, and should that faculty member not be, up to muster relative to our standards, we would not recommend that particular individual for tenure. Tenure, though, does provide academic freedom for faculty in the classroom. It allows them to teach without the fear of reprisal from outside forces, sometimes administrations, sometimes presidents, but it certainly enriches the learning experience, and that's what it's geared to do in the classroom. And tenure is certainly under the gun nationally. It's been challenged at the K through 12 level. It's been challenged at the higher ed level. It is something, though, that is part of the fabric of higher education and has been for a long, long time.
And I think it's not just people say, well, then you just have your job forever. If a professor began to be ineffective for whatever reason, even though they have tenure, they can be fired.
Oh, absolutely.
People think that if you have tenure, it doesn't matter what you do after that. But no, if somebody were being ineffective, tenure could not protect them from being dismissed.
That is absolutely correct. And it is more of a commitment from the institution to say that we see value in your work as part of our campus community. When we hire a tenure track faculty member, it's our expectation that we are going to see that faculty member through with a lot of professional development, with a lot of support through that tenure process so that they achieve tenure. If they've not achieved tenure, we feel as an institution that we've failed mutually. So certainly it is about making sure that we have quality instruction and commitment from our employees.
That's interesting, that the way you phrase that. It sounds as though the institution was supporting the professor and not just staring him down to see if he earns tenure. A very nice attitude about professional development, and not just, well, you didn't make it, too bad, out the door, but seeing some value in a new teacher, a new professor, to encourage them and suggest professional development and so forth. I mean, so much is given to professors now, responsibility, like technology. Just, I mean, quickly, you know, there are whiteboards and computers and online courses and so many things, MOOCs and, you know, massive online courses. How are the professors working with technology?
You know, the professors today are challenged more than ever before. Our faculty at Worcester State University carry a 4-4 teaching load, which means they teach 4 classes per semester, fall and spring, and that's a heavy load. That's a full load, but it's also back to our roots as a teaching institution. We are not an institution that has a lot of graduate students teaching the classes. That you're either a full-time faculty or you're an adjunct. Very few graduate students teach our courses, again, because we want professionals teaching our students, and the focus is on the teaching as opposed to the research, although research is an important component. Technology has created a challenge to all of our faculty to on the delivery of their classes. How do they blend technology into their teaching? We work with faculty annually, regularly, to make sure that they are presented with as much technology as they need, that they're trained, that the technology is up to date, that we're looking at online courses, that we're looking at blended courses, and all other models as well. Where this will all go, time will tell. There are many different theories and thoughts on that. We could have our own show, on this.
I was thinking as you began speaking, we should do a whole show, including some of the professors and how they are using technology.
But it is being driven again by the student, because our average age of our students at Worcester State is creeping up. It's almost 27 years old now, which means we have a lot of adult learners who are managing different aspects of their life, where technology is an aid to allowing that student to stay enrolled, stay full-time, and maybe take a class or 2 online so that they can get through and manage their households, their jobs, their career, and their education.
Well, I do so much too now on the computer, but I get so aggravated when somehow the computer decides to change my tab, or the mechanics of it can just, I mean, I have all these thoughts flowing. When I use my pencil, I could just get it out, and now I have to stop in 2 space, what font? I mean, it's just, to me, I use it, of course, but it's like, as you said, extra. It's wonderful to have it, but it does add another dimension. And so now we've talked about the pressures and the professors, and nearing the end here, we'll talk about the promises that universities make to students. One of them is, you already mentioned, and that is the success of passing from community colleges. You have guaranteed that, right? That
Yes.
the credits will be
Yes.
accepted. But the other thing is about safety today. With all, you know, we're just so alarmed by all this on-campus killings and so forth, the shootings and so forth. So I'm wondering, how are our public institutions responding to all of this lack of safety, shootings and people going into classrooms and gunning down people? It's not easy to think about how you would deal with it.
Well, Virginia Tech kind of changed the landscape for all of us, didn't it?
Yes.
Back in 2007,
Sure did.
and that was a wake-up call for the higher ed community nationally, to say basically we need to rethink how we are protecting our students, protecting our campuses, how we are responding. That was when we stopped in terms of how we approached first responders, in terms of how they were trained. Since that point in time, Worcester State University, like the other state universities, has made a commitment towards safety on their campuses, whether it is arming campus police on our campus, whether it is hiring more full-time police officers, how they're trained. Our officers go through the state police training process. They go to the State Police Training Academy and go through the same level of academy that you would see if you were hiring a state police officer here in Massachusetts. On top of that, we do tabletop exercises with our faculty, with our staff, with our students, to train them how to respond. I think that you saw in the most recent situation at Ohio State, what was very prominent in the news reports was the messaging and how that messaging came out using text messages, emails, phone, and what were the responses to run, hide, or fight. Those were the messages, and those are the messages that we have been circulating through our campus as well, to make sure that our faculty and staff are up to speed with how to respond should an incident occur. This training happens annually. We spend a lot of money to make sure that happens. And in a gateway city like Worcester, it also spills out into the community, and we certainly work with our local community agencies, city police, to make sure that the city is in sync with what our campus is doing as well.
Well, we have only about a minute left, so I think I will ask you, what is your greatest frustration at this point, and/or your reason for optimism?
I'm a glass half full kind of guy. You know, my frustration is always in the sense that, you know, I wish we could do more for our students. But my greatest enjoyment is working with students on a regular basis. That is where I get my energy from. I've been blessed with wonderful colleagues at Worcester State. I'm in a great city. Worcester is a thriving city. Last year alone, 50 new restaurants opened in the city of Worcester. We're celebrated with 10 other schools in Worcester. And every year, 36,000 college students come to the city.
Wow.
It's a great learning environment. So I'm really blessed to be at a great institution in a great city, doing really important work.
Well, your university is lucky to have such a optimistic and engaged professor and president now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. In closing, I'd like to say that public higher education is part of the foundation of our country. It's necessary for our democracy. I think it's time for more funding and more attention to the great value of our public colleges and universities, not for profit, but for the public good. And in fact, that's our mission and motivation here on School Talk.